computer. So we are recording now, but we're not live yet. And oops, what's going on? Thing. Okay, now it's not allowing me to go live. Something's happening with the stream. Of course. This time I don't think it's my fault, so this is good.
Well, I want someone to blame.
Now, you can blame me. I'm gonna have to start a new stream. It crashed out on me. So let me just do that one more time. All very professionally done. Brought to you by Tyler Nicholson with the screw up. It's gonna give me like 2 seconds to write the title again. Let's see. Would you rather be called ceramic artist or sculptor or maker?
Or spatial artist.
Or spatial artist.
I really don't care.
Artist.
Artist is fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't get caught up in the hierarchies of that discussion.
It is a discussion, but yeah, I'm with you.
I mean, most of my work is ceramic, and I am an artist, so I'm good there, you know. But I mean, it's interesting. You call someone a ceramic artist, and they don't identify as that. They get super offended.
They're like, how?
You know, I have people that call me like a potter, and then like it's like those word bubbles. They're like, oh, so you're a potter, and then they know that they said something that they know other people are offended by.
And they want
to try to like they just try to eat their words.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's fine.
I mean, you're not
Fine.
a potter, but like you can make pots. Okay. We're gonna go live right now, and then give it like 10 seconds for this thing to catch up. Let's see, setting up.
Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it looks like we're live.
You did it.
Hey guys.
All right. Give me 1 second. Let me maximize myself. All right. Good evening, everyone. This is Ty Nicholson, the ceramic studio manager here at the Hudgens Center, with Kate Driscoll, the publics program manager. And today, with our visiting artist talk, we are bringing in redeemed ceramic sculpture artist Adam Shiverdecker. Esteemed. Yeah. I went to under or redeemed. I don't know.
Sure.
Esteemed associate professor of spatial arts from San Jose State University. Welcome, Adam.
Hi Ty. Hi Kate. Thank you, and Facebook land. Thanks for having me today. So yeah, I'm an artist. I live in Berkeley, California, and I teach at San Jose State University, the head of the ceramics area there, and I also currently am the program coordinator for spatial art. So that's a little bit about what I do. And what I prepared today is a brief little PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to share my screen here shortly, and then I will take you on a quick little tour of my home studio and demo, my process, because I think that's why a lot of you might be watching or tuning in, so to speak, to see how I make my work. So I'm happy to entertain all the questions. I think Kate and Ty are going to be fielding those for me, or asking those. So Would you like me to go ahead and begin with my presentation now, or what?
I think so. Yeah, that'd be great.
Answer any question? Yeah,
Mhm.
let's do that. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And here we go. Okay, so I'm going to just talk a little bit about kind of various projects that I worked on in the past, I'd say 8 years or so. This piece right here is called the Banquet of Pootis, which was installed last year at the Museum of Craft and Design in San Francisco, and it's comprised of 13 separate pieces suspended from the ceiling. The anchor piece there in the center is a tail section from a Learjet XJ60, and then it's surrounded by these Greek vessels. But where did this all come from? It came from when I was in grad school. I was making some figurative work, and I was really interested in the flesh and the surface of these works, and I was actually trying to create peeling like paint surface, kind of making these macabre little sculptures, and I started inserting nichrome wire in them. I kind of discovered that they would discolor this glaze and make it look like a dried blood, rusty color when it interacted during the firing. So I started inserting like little staples and little bars in the mouth here of this little tortured little figure. And eventually over time, I really decided that I needed to kind of develop my understanding of the potential for the surfaces and for the forms actually. And so I actually made this little submarine out of nichrome wire. So this is all made of high refractory wire called nichrome. And nichrome is a really specialized alloy. It can be fired to 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. And I thought if I create a sculpture out of nichrome and put a skin of clay over top of it, the clay, when it dries and is fired, it's going to shrink and kind of like recoil from the wire and leave me with like this cracked, fissured surface. And to my delight, it actually did. So this is the first piece of nichrome and clay, I would say predominantly nichrome sculpture that I made. And then I followed it up with several other things. So this is a really small piece, it's about 10 inches in length. And then they progressed to this behemoth. This is a Predator drone replica. It's a quarter scale replica. It measures 17 feet across. So from that little 10-inch submarine, I started to think about and imagine new ways of actually making work that kind of moved beyond the scale of the kiln, and kind of devised this new system of just making the work in parts. It's kind of a la Viola Frey, kind of looking at like her work and seeing how she was stacking things and making these large scale ceramic sculptures modularly. And so I started to kind of imagine that, and I was able to kind of push the boundaries of the kiln, because that's the thing about ceramics, is it seems to be the size of the kiln really limits like the scale of the work. Unless you work modularly or in several pieces. So this is taken at the Foster White Gallery in Seattle, and suspended there for a show several years ago. And a little close up. One thing I also like to do is really experiment with ceramic materials. Really kind of interested in the idiosyncrasies of clay, and kind of like focus in on elements that they have at different stages of the process. So we're looking here at like the propeller section of the Predator drone, and the beigeish color stuff is actually just dry clay that I threw on wet glaze, because I was trying to get this more like earthy quality, like it's, you know, kind of dug up from an archaeological dig. So that led me to creating amphoras for some reason. I wanted to kind of sidestep military work. I had made a couple other pieces, and I'm going to show you more of those here shortly, that really kind of dealt with, you know, my idea of militarism and the way that we can kind of celebrate war and weapons of war, and kind of like make monuments out of them. And that's what I was kind of thinking about, you know, when I was making the large work. And then I also started thinking about other cultures that venerated war, and, you know, how those were depicted in different cultures across time. So I started to really scrutinize and look at ancient Greek vessels. So this is one that I had suspended from the ceiling. I suspend a lot of my work, actually. And so it led to these larger versions. It's kind of a collision of, you know, the past and like old and new. And this is something I'm really kind of like interested in, is like this, yeah, I guess a collision of where these worlds meet, of like ancient time and the new world. So that's why I made these pieces in porcelain and then a dark stoneware. The aesthetics I'm looking at are, you know, deep sea, I guess crashes is the word. So this is an old submarine, and I really enjoy seeing how like the skin is like pulling away from elements. Like seeing how like life is starting to take over. We see like lichen begin to live and grow over top of that. So I'm looking at that kind of stuff when I'm creating my work. And this is a large installation. This is my first banquet. This is the Banquet of the Leviathan. And a lot of my work, I'm referencing Greek mythology, and I'm referencing Judeo-Christian mythology. So Leviathan is like the great sea monster, essentially. Mm-hmm. So we have here these, you know, this little flotilla of submarines and some Greek vessels, and then we even have a little predator drone over here. I'm kind of like watching from above. A little close up of that large submarine. The large submarine is about 12 feet. It's actually exactly 12 feet long. And this is helpful. Awesome little high school class checking out this show. This is at the Visual Arts Center in Richmond back in 2013, I believe. This was the first installment. This is actually my thesis show. I don't really show this very often, but I think it's kind of interesting to look at. And this is part of, you know, the evolution of my work and the trajectory of my work. So this is you know, this was based on the I'm trying to remember the exact aircraft carrier, but it's an aircraft carrier and some other little airplanes playing with shadows. And this is a large scale Rhyton. Rhyton is an ancient Greek drinking vessel, usually horn shaped, oftentimes with the head of a ram on one end, and then it opens up in the other end, and they were used during Dionysian festivals to celebrate the wine harvest. And some other Greek vessels, and kind of placing, you know, the old imagery with new iconography together. So we have a predator drone with a Trojan warrior here. This little cracked vessel, kind of, you know, just a nice little way to discuss, or at least like, I guess, bring some kind of critique to, you know, acts of violence and war. So this is a little behind the scenes action. This is inside a kiln. Ty might recognize this kiln. This was a big kiln that we actually had in Pensacola. I used to teach at the University of West Florida. And so a lot of my work, because if it is glazed, and I've actually moved away from glazing my work recently. If it is glazed, you know, I glaze all around the piece, and so I don't want it sitting on top of a kiln shelf. So I actually have to suspend it in the kiln. So this just shows you a little bit of the process, or a little bit of what that looks like. So I'm placing kiln shelves at the bottom of the kiln and some alumina, raw alumina underneath that, so it can catch drips and anything that falls off of the wire, which there's a lot of shedding during the firings. The wire heats up just as much as everything else, and when it does heat up, it can kind of repel the clay, and so it'll fall off a little bit. So I suspended them from more nichrome. So I actually, have to truss everything and suspend everything inside the kiln. And this will take, this image is probably taken about 3 hours into loading these two pieces. So it can be pretty laborious, but it's also a lot of fun. I really do enjoy the element of engineering. Actually, I was in mechanical engineering for a little while when I was an undergrad. I really do enjoy that element of ceramics and of art and sculpture in general. So I think that's one of the reasons why I came to this. So I'm just going to kind of breeze through this, just show you a little bit behind the scenes of how these pieces come about. So adding more nichrome wire. So this was, these were one piece at one time. Now they're two separate pieces, and covering the nichrome wire and clay. That's what it looks like when the clay is still wet. Now, obviously, when clay dries, it loses the moisture, and when you lose moisture, it loses its scale and it shrinks. And the wire still helps it maintain the form, the wire structure underneath. So get this beautiful, cracks, these fissures that I think really speak to the stress of the material and the stress of these images that I'm kind of depicting. I think it's a very stressful kind of time, I guess, that we're living in. So I think might be the last image I have to show, just one of the more recent volute craters, which is another Greek vessel form. So that's what I have for that. I will stop the share and then come back to my studio here. So actually, before I put this up and demo, let's just do a quick little tour. So this is my home studio here in Berkeley. I'm working out of, it's essentially like a basement. It's a semi-finished room, and it is carpeted, which is weird for a clay person, but I have uncarpeted areas, and they're more raw concrete, so I can be a little more messy over there. But I like to kind of work in a cozy, comfortable space. So this is my space. I'm gonna do one of these spins. You kind of see what I'm doing here. And then these lights are from our photo kit at the university for photographing work, and they just light up this space really well so my students can see me, because I'm also teaching from home here right now, and I have my wheel class is also working on the wheels that they borrowed from school, and so this is my studio.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and this is the cleanest my studio has been in quite some time, because my students need to see a clean space, I guess. So, any rate, do you guys have any questions? I'm just talking. I'll keep talking. I don't even know what time it is. So,
I think it's funny because I've known your work for a long time, Adam. It's fun to see how it's how before it was really a lot about the nichrome wire, that being the heavy part of the sculpture. And now it's become less about the wire again. While it's still important to the overall vessel and structure of your sculpture, it's more about the object again and less about the wire.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's this is kind of the fun part of what I do, is I'm always kind of looking at objects and how they're used, and their function in our world and society. And it's hard to deny the historical aspect of ceramics, and it's hard to deny its relevance in previous cultures and our culture even today. You look across different times and places, and anthropologically, it can really help define, and help us like understand previous cultures. So I think it's just a really fascinating material to work in. So I'll talk a little bit. I'll just show you briefly, how I begin stuff in wire. I usually sketch things out on graph paper. So this is a Danera mug made by IKEA, the world's most used mug in the world. I think they sell like, I don't know, 20,000 of these a day. I don't know if it's that many. I'm making that number up. But I've made several of these Danera mugs. I think it's kind of interesting to think about like the ubiquitousness of them, ubiquity of that mug. This might look familiar to you.
Yes.
This was on display actually at the Hudgens
Yeah.
last year. So I've got a few of I've got actually two where I cover them completely in clay. So you can kind of like see these. So kind of like siblings. But, back to what you were just saying, like, it is less about the wire. Like this first one, it's hard to see because I'm wearing a black shirt. But you can see that. So this is the same. These are all like, the same form. And I've made all these out of wire, just like this. And I'm going to show you guys how I put the clay on the wire here shortly, after I bend a little bit of wire. So I'll work with this. And then I have a giant spool of wire that I pull from. And I buy my nichrome in bulk from a couple different distributors. It is a commodity, so the price of it changes. So I always, when I purchase, I just check with different distributors and see what, get quotes. But I buy mass bulk, so this is, so it's not cheap, but it's a large part of my practice. So yeah. So I'll just take it off the spool here. And let's see here. You guys can see here. So I just pull it off the spool and actually make another ring for the inside of this. This is the top of an amphora. Actually kind of looks nice. You just have them like sitting here on the wire. It won't float. But so this is the top half. I already completed the bottom half, and I don't know where that one is. I think it's off in the world somewhere else. I cut this amphora in half, and then after I cut it in half, I insert the nichrome into the clay while it's still leather hard, and then I will fire it to maturity. So with the porcelain, this has already been fired to cone tin reduction, so not quite 2,400 degrees, but just a little bit below that. So I do that because if I'm going to replicate the other half in this, I need this half to shrink fully. If I replicate this after I've only fired it once, like in bisque or something, then the wire will like completely blow out when I fire this to maturity. Like, so if I did like the bottom in porcelain and the top as porcelain, this needs to have shrunk already. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So I just pull the wire off. Good set of pliers is really helpful. And I will just basically get a rough estimate of how long it needs to be. These smaller sculptures, this is a really small sculpture for me. These smaller sculptures, there's still probably a solid, 60 to 80 hours in them. There's actually a lot of time that goes into the production of a solid clay piece. I wet sand them so they're really, very smooth. So you can actually kind of see there's a little sheen on it. That sheen is just from essentially sanding it and then firing it. So, and then once it comes out of the high fire kiln, I'll sand it, wet sand it again with like 1,000 grit, working with the 1,000 grit. So I'm just bending the wire. If you guys can see that, just make it a little loop here. And then with this, I just go by the feel of it. Like I'm just starting to kind of like create the form. I'm going to try to like, replicate the bottom half of the amphora, and I'll start to like disintegrate that as I go. You know, with these though, and I've got stacks and stacks of diagrams. When I'm trying to replicate something exactly, I will draw it out, and then I'm actually, you know, following, and I'm making each of these rings out of wire, and I'm like building with wire as I go up the piece. But this one, I'm just going to do this real quick. Diameter. Move it through. It makes a lot of fun sounds. I'm sure my headphones are picking up right now. Hear that wire. It's like fingernails on a chalkboard.
It's like you almost need safety glasses too, because I'm wondering how many times you've been stabbed in the face with those wires.
You know, the biggest culprit of injury in my studio actually is these.
Oh, really?
When I'm like, you'll see. I'll show you. I'll try not to be. Oh, I'm not going to injure myself today. Purposefully, at least. But I have bloodied my face several times. But yeah, the glasses thing, I actually wore those, and I used to wear gloves and everything. But anyway, I'll just show you here what I'm doing. So I'm just making a ring out of wire, okay? And I chase the wire around. I like this to be super snug and tight, because when it goes into the kiln, the wire will, you know, when it heats up, it loosens. So if I don't create really tight connections, I can really start to like lose a form. And I've had things just like completely crash. And sometimes those results, now I'm really trying to like control those crashes. And I can show you a piece where I've done that actually. But I right now am trying to still maintain some kind of semblance of form, you know. So I'm just chasing that around, and I'm going to cut that. And this is just a wire ring. So you guys just learned how to make a ring out of wire. This is really rocket science. And then I'll take that ring, insert it, and I start to bend the wire around it. And then I'll, you know, once I get to, you know, the next, I'll start to like, you know, change the diameter of the rings as I'm building this up. And then at some point I'll stop and fire it again before I actually put any clay on it, because the wire actually has a little bit of a coating on it. It's kind of like it's not plastic coating, but it's got some kind of like greasy coating. And so when I apply the clay to it, it'll sometimes just like drip right off. It's kind of like, you know, if you've ever just like freshly waxed your car and driven in the rain, it's kind of like that. It just like wants to kind of like fall away. It adds a little bit of tooth to the nichrome wire, and also it removes like the memory from the wire. So, and it oxidizes and it turns black. So you can see in here, since this piece has already been fired, the wire is black. Mm-hmm. The new wire is silver, like straight off the spool. So yeah. So I just kind of like loop this around.
So when you fire it, that memory that it loses, it's the wire. I mean, it's not going to change shape again after you put it back in the kiln, right?
Only if I change the shape of it. Right. So you know, right once it's been fired, it's I can't see because maybe I should have worn a white shirt today. It's really pliable and really soft now after it's been fired. Before, when it's raw and right off the spool, it's pretty stiff. And so it'll also like unwind a little bit. And this is something that potters are pretty familiar with, you know, like when you're throwing on the wheel, you know, the clay is kind of going up in this spiral direction. Well, when I'm building this, it actually kind of spirals a little bit as well. And so it'll unwind in the kiln, and then I can adjust it. If I don't adjust it and put clay right on the wire before it's been fired, it'll unwind and kind of like alter the shape of it in its final firing. Again, I'm trying to control as much of it as possible. So I would just kind of like keep building with this, you know, until I get to a point where I'm ready to add clay to it. So I'm going to put that aside, and I'll finish that later. Something I've been kind of doing in this quarantine is I've been going around to stuff, things I've had sitting around in my studio that I haven't, like, they're like little projects that I started work on a while ago. And it's kind of like, you know, when you haven't gone to the grocery in a while and you go into your fridge, like, what can I make? You know, what I have macaroni, I have milk and pickles. What do I do with that? You know? So I'm kind of like in that mode right now. I'm going around to different things I have in my studio. I'm trying to like finish projects that like have been sitting idle. So like that piece I was just working on just now, that's been sitting here in my studio for probably 2 years. And it's just, you know, and now that I've done something with it, I'll hopefully finish it. But I want to show you this. So this is, yeah, this is just the same as this little Donera mug. So I made this. This is about 3 hours to get to this point. Now, after I have this, I'm ready to actually, I should fire it again, but I just for today, I'm not going to, but because that's all I have. But I'm ready to go ahead and put clay on it. So I have some, this is like where it gets fun and messy. I'll put this down. So I've actually just taken a little bit of my porcelain slop, and I've made kind of a little chunky slurry out of it. And I like to have a water bottle next to me. I'm going to show you what that's for here shortly. Some underglaze, some water, a brush, and an extra container. And I think that's good. I also have something to wash my hands with here because this is where it gets a little messy. So now that I just have the wire, I'm going to go ahead and just take some of this slurry. Move this down so you can see a little better. And I'll just throw it onto the piece, usually. Get all Jackson Pollock. A lot of it kind of falls off. The chunkier stuff is really good. If you can get some like, you know, bone dry scraps from trimming your pieces, add some water to that, and then don't add too much water, and then maybe add some more dry scraps to it and get some really nice chunky slurry. It's super good. So sometimes I'll dip it in, but I'm just trying to build up the clay on this surface essentially. And you know, with the bigger pieces, this is really falling off. It's kind of soft. Sometimes when the slurry is a little too soft, it doesn't want to stick too well.
Pavel M. Roman says hi.
Hey, Pavel. I remember seeing some of his work when I was in school. I think it was in Asheville at the Blue Spiral Gallery. And yeah, I really like Pavel's work. We'll just see what he's working on now. I think then there was like these little, like warring puppies going to war. Anyway, so all right, I now have just a bunch of slurry on here. I'm also going to make like a little porcelain skin for it. But before I do that, this is where I'll just clear this out of the way. Before I do that, I'm actually going to change the texture of this. Right now, as you can kind of see, it just looks like frosting on a cake. It's really smooth, and it just looks like icing to me right now, you know. And I kind of want this like more, you know, textured element that clay is really good at kind of showing. So I'm gonna wash my hands real quick. And so now, that's where the water bottle comes in. So if I just spray the slurry a little bit, the water droplets will add a lot of texture to this. It's also going to soften it, so a little bit more is going to fall off, you know. I can control this to like just a small degree. Beyond that, like the clay does its thing, which is actually a lot of fun. And what I really dig about the material, so it kind of has its say in the finished product. So I've already prepped this. It's really important to me that it comes out like at the right velocity. If you're doing like a fine mist, you actually don't get much of a changed surface texture on here. If it's too aggressive, then you're just poking holes in it, which I like to do on some of the larger pieces. So I'm just going to double check. Yep, we're good. So it's kind of like a medium. So I'm just going to spray. You guys can see it, right? It's pretty glossy and smooth. So if I just spray it, it's going to look like the surface of the moon. And it craters. And then more is going to fall off. And that's fine. So now, let's see, a little more over here. Trying to squirt the computer. All right, so let's see. Yeah, that's a good side. Can you guys see that? The texture there?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so it's now kind of like cratered, and it has more of this like natural like rock formation, right? And so after the clay is fired, it's it turns into rock essentially. So it turns into stone. So it looks a little more natural, which I really like about it. So there, I'm going to set that aside. And how are we doing on time?
Oh, you have 10 minutes.
Okay, good. Okay, so the last little bit, to this side. You know what? Let's put that there.
Yeah, I hate to interrupt your process, but I do have a question. I'm curious of why you're specifically using an IKEA mug. It seems like Walmart's always kind of like the easy target for like producible or high volume produced things. Why an IKEA mug?
Why an IKEA mug? Those I don't know. I think while there are Walmarts all over the world, I think IKEA seems to be more of like the design lead, right? And I remember when I did a little research, back when I first made my first mug, in my research I found that they sold the most mugs. And so it was kind of like, I was just trying to connect to ubiquity with this little project. I really only made like 6 or 7 of these maybe at the most. I don't make them that out. I typically don't make things, I don't remember why there's, typically don't make things more than once, actually. So like all of my sketches back here, they're usually, for one-offs. Because again, like I really do enjoy like the engineering of it. This last project that I installed last year in San Francisco, the Banquet of Pootis, I did make one form 3 times. But that was just because the form itself was all about like wealth, and the whole piece was about inequality anyways. I'm thinking about like objects of wealth across time. So I decided to kind of choose one of the vessels that really personified wealth in ancient Greece. And that is actually this piece right here, this Lakitos. So these are for carrying water to a bath, a ritual bath, mostly for women that were about to be married. They'd have their ritual bath before their wedding ceremony, or these were also used for funerary ceremonies, and they were always, kind of they accompanied very wealthy people. So I did make 3 of those. But usually I don't make more than that. It's a really long answer. So, all right, I'm making a clay skin for this piece, and as I banging here on the table, more clay is falling off my little porcelain mug. I'm gonna set this aside real quick. But I do throw really thin skins of clay to create like the skins on the wire. So by doing this, I'm also kind of like coaching the clay to stretch and crack, which I really like it to do anyways. So oftentimes, when you see clay artists and they're making slabs, they always compress the slabs, and that's good for most things that you're doing in clay. I want the clay to really show itself, so I kind of like coach it to crack and fissure a little bit more. So as you can see, every time I'm doing this, I'm pulling towards my body, and this is starting to get pretty thin. It's almost like what I would say like saltine cracker. Now you can see it's already starting to tear. So this is exactly what I want. And there we go. See, when it starts to fall apart, that's perfect. So I'll take these little slabs and I start to actually kind of like I'll tear them a little bit, and I'll make little skins to add to these pieces. And you can get some really nice, it's pretty thin. It's hard to see thinness, I guess, but these are really thin, like 1/16 of an inch. But you get to see that, that this edge here, I really think that's helpful for the work. It shows that like that quality of earth, and I think it has a really important value for this work. So I will now put this aside. I can start to apply this to the surface. And I'll also I like to throw them on here. And that slip, it really helps these like skins like stay on the wire. Otherwise they'll sometimes like want to fall off. So I'll just do in a few spots. I still like to leave a lot of openness for the wire, and still kind of like see that structure. So I've just got these skins on here right now. And then sometimes something actually, because I'm not glazing a lot of work now, I'm just like watering down some like underglazes. So I just got like a black underglaze. Here, I'm just gonna pour a little bit. Add a little water to it. And I'm gonna just drizzle this over the top of the piece. I'll just drizzle this over the top of the piece. And let it do its magic. And sometimes after I've done this, I will spray it again with water. Really kind of like, I feel like I've said the word coach a lot today. Kind of like coach the underglaze to like really run. There's some really beautiful spots inside here. You can kind of see. So by see a little bit there. So by doing this, I'm just drizzling a little bit of that on. It actually looks really good on the inside, better than the outside. If I pull this off, I'm gonna pull the little skin off. skin off of this, not of me.
Pavel M. Roman also says IKEA was founded by a Nazi sympathizer, so I think you've picked a good target.
Yeah. I mean, everyone gives IKEA so much credit for like being this like world-class like designer and stuff. And there's definitely a couple of things here in my studio that are from IKEA, but they're actually terrible at designing those cart systems where you put your cart in the parking lot. I park next to one, and their carts go underneath, and so the whole side of my car got scratched because someone just like pushed their cart into the thing, and it just scratched the whole entire side of my car. I'm like, you have those like low carts, and you have these like cart corrals that aren't designed to stop the carts from hitting the cars beyond it. Terrible design, IKEA. Terrible design. I took pictures of it, and I've been meaning to send it in to them. But yeah, there you go. You're gonna see a little bit of that. So this really is able to like kind of like show the clay, and it's not glossy, but I really like that, like, you know, the element of the underglaze over top of the clay. Once it starts to like really run down, just kind of like settle into the low spots. So that's my process. Bigger pieces, you know, obviously there's a lot more to it. You know, I will sometimes have to like create structures to build the wire on. You know, this big piece back here, I had to create a giant, I used a giant piece of cardboard, and had to make my own kind of like bizarre little template out of nails and wood, so I could actually make this piece. So there's a lot of weird little engineering things I like to solve and create, so I can actually like make the work. So there's a lot of like work that goes into the planning stages, I guess, that I really enjoy. So it's a lot of the fun for me. Yeah.
I was just wondering, what got you into the idea of like military vessels and then, you know, actual like, you know, water vessels? So what, I guess, got you into that?
So the military stuff happened because I was in grad school at the time, and it was like 2008, and we were like really heavily involved in the Middle East and Afghanistan, and I grew up in a difficult to kind of describe it. I grew up in an atmosphere that was pacifist, and so I think that's something that I've always kind of held to, is just this notion of the necessity of war, and you know what it actually does to societies and cultures, and the reason why we go to war. And so, you know, I think at that time, you know, 10, 12 years ago when I was working on it, we were really heavily involved. We still are, obviously. But it was something that I couldn't escape, and I just wanted to make work about it. You know, I'm also really like interested in the machines, and how like the technologies that we create are often our most deadliest. Or our most advanced technologies are our most deadliest. And so there was kind of like a critique on that, and just kind of a hopeful kind of like monument to something that, you know, my hope is that it's, you know, obsolete over time. And so, you know, the work is supposed to kind of like exude this element of time. So by placing like contemporary military objects in conversation with like ancient past objects, I'm hoping that there's some kind of like conversation or critique happening where people are able to kind of, you know, make those connections. So yeah, that's where the military stuff came from. I also grew up in a cornfield near a really large Air Force base outside of Dayton, Ohio. And I would always see, you know, we'd always go on these like field trips to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. We would go on field trips to the the Air Force Museum. And just the way that military cultures like really celebrated in those venues. And I think there's I respect and understand like the need for that, but I'm just kind of like really interested in like the technology of it and like the objects, you know. That's why I actually don't depict people, because I don't want there to be any like misgivings about you know, service members. I think they are some of our bravest people in our society, and respect the heck out of them. So it's more about like the overarching, you know, politics of it, you know.
And my
Yeah,
other
just be like all doom and gloom right now, right?
no, that's really interesting. But I was also wondering, as you been wondering this before, listening to like your process and everything, do you have like a really active imaginative life? There's a lot of things you'll talk about. I'm like, how do you think of this? Like, do you daydream a lot, or?
Yes. That's an interesting question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me if I daydream. I don't know if I daydream. I'm a scenario builder. If I see something happen, I'm trying to like make excuses for that thing to be like a good thing, like or for like the act of the person to be good, that they had intended for it to be this way or another. So I think I'm just always trying to like kind of like figure out ways of like constructing a narrative that is like hopeful and positive, and yet like the outcome of my work is all dark for some reason. But yeah, I would say like if like considering possibilities and trying to make connections like to mythology and looking at like history is a way of like daydreaming, then yeah, I'm thinking about that stuff all the time. Good question.
Yeah. And then, guys, anyone in the live chat, if you have a question, then yeah, definitely put it in.
I have, I'll just say this, I give workshops every now and then, and I have like a sheet that I've typed up. I haven't shared that with you guys, but if anyone's interested in like my process, they can just email me and I can email them like a PDF. On here, I just talk a little bit about like what nichrome is, why I use the specific type of a nichrome that I have, and clays and glazes and stuff. And I can share that with whoever's interested in that. I should also add, I do use this like kind of like thicker wire, and this is just because it seems to be like the right price point and hold a structure. Something else that's really important to know, the reason why a lot of my work that I showed earlier is trussed or suspended in a kiln. It's because it actually does not hold its structure once it's heated up. So the wire gets really soft and then wants to actually like collapse. So even work that has like a base to it. So let me go get a piece here real quick and show you an example of what I'm talking about. So like this piece, I have the porcelain base that I threw on the wheel, inserted the wire, and then I created the top half of this crater. And I shouldn't have worn black today. Trying to get out of the way of it. There we go. So I actually built with kiln furniture up around this piece with bricks and kiln shelves, and I took more nichrome wire and I suspended from certain places in here. Otherwise, it's just going to all collapse. So this is something I was alluding to earlier about like controlled collapses and kind of like controlling that element. This is something where I decided to kind of like play with that a little bit, and I only suspended it from a couple different places, and I allowed this collapse over here to happen. So I really quite enjoyed this, like the movement of it. It's a little more natural. It seems less contrived, which I think some of the other work that's really like, really retains the form and the structure of the specific pieces that I'm referencing, kind of like have a little bit of that contrived quality. And with this, I think I'm allowing like the clay and the wire to like have its, you know, say in the form and its overall piece. So yeah.
I don't know. Magdalene asks, could you speak to the role of material experimentation in finding your work? I was having problems with the last name. Sorry, Magdalene.
Is it Dykstra?
It is.
Oh yeah. Hi, Magdalene. So yeah, the idiosyncrasies of clay. I don't know. I think, you know, somewhere along the way, I saw like a cracked cup or a cracked plate somewhere. I don't think it was a Volcus thing. I do remember seeing a show at an NCECA like years and years ago of some like Japanese ceramics, and there was just some really beautifully cracked like sculptures, and there's like this like little element of glaze just kind of like falling down the cracks, and I think something in that kind of caught me, and I realized that I'm really interested in kind of like showing the material for what it's for. You know, like as ceramic artists, like one of the things we're trying to do most of the time is keep cracks away from our work, right? We're trying to build things that don't fall apart or don't crack. So there's something kind of like delicious about making work that is supposed to crack. You know, again, like the wire does not shrink, you know, so by putting the clay on it, I know immediately what's going to happen, right? I know how it's going to go wrong. And I know how it's going to kind of like fall apart. And what I'm really trying to do is just like kind of capture that and isolate it, you know, and freeze that. There's something I heard or I read in some like interview with Sterling Ruby. He calls like, he has some like term he has for kilns that they're like they like freeze material, and they freeze like soft material, freeze time. I don't know what it is. I have to look it up again. But like there is something about that. Like these are all like kind of like frozen breaking parts, right? For like a sculpture, like they're like frozen in time now. They're frozen in this place because they're hard and they're fired. And as far as like, you know, experimenting with stuff, I don't think you're gonna like have much joy in your work if you're not constantly, you know, trying a new thing here and there. I get bored with stuff, so you know, I don't. My hats are off to like studio potters. I couldn't do that because I couldn't make like 100 mugs in a day. I was just like, you know, it's not something I can do. It's a personality thing, I guess. I just have to try different things, and even if it's the same form with like different glazes or different clay, you know, I experiment a lot with clays. I have like probably at least 15 different clays over here. You know, I use clay as like my palette. Black clays, brown clays, red clays, white clays, off-white clays. It's kind of like a little rainbow here. Well, it's all red, black, or white, but brown. But yeah, I think that experimentation is just like super crucial element. I still get a kick out of you know, discovering and finding new ways of like using clay. So side note, I do have some new work that I haven't shown you guys, and I can't show you yet because then it's like discoveries phase, but it's a pretty it's kind of the opposite of this. So I'm thinking a little bit more about like efficiency of resources. So I'm looking at like flat pack work. I'm kind of working on a flat pack ceramics project. And I'm also looking at strangely origami right now, and ways that I can utilize that with ceramics. So I'm kind of like having fun with those experiments right now. And I'll unveil those eventually when I actually have some success. They're not working out yet, but fingers crossed.
Well, we look forward to seeing it, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But I think we have to wrap it up now. Adam, thank you so much for letting us into your studio and answering our questions, and for all the work you've done. And for, you know, for those of you who don't know, I had the good fortune of being one of Adam's students, so I learned a lot from him.
Oh, Ty, it was a pleasure working with you, and always good to see you. And thank you so much to the Hudgens Center. And I know you guys do really good work there. And you know, everyone needs to stay safe and healthy through all this. And I hope you guys are able to, you know, kind of weather the storm and be creative and, you know, scream into your pillow when you need to.
Well, yeah, thank you so much, Adam. It was really nice meeting you. It was really fascinating listening to you talk about your work and be able to actually see it.
Great. Thanks, guys, for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Facebook.